Thank you and welcome back, everybody. We're going into the quarterly session with the IAASB Chair and Leadership. I believe we don't have Willie online today. We've got Tom and James. So, Tom, we'll do it in the same way that we normally do. We'll hand over to you that you can go through your slides. With Tom, just to remind the board, we said on the IAASB side, we're going to focus, obviously, just spend a moment to reflect on going concern because we've been asked to certify that now, even though we've done the work on that. And then we'll spend some time on a little bit of a stand back. And Tom, also obviously a few comments on fraud because that's due for PIOB certification in the next round. So over to you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Again, we really are at an interesting moment in our board's work plan, and I view this very much as that we're at a very important phase of our IAASB life at an eventful time for both the world and the accountancy profession globally. Today's discussion really sort of is an opportunity to reflect on these realities, both in terms of seeing how we're adapting our priorities and interactions, and secondly, by how we sort of have come to the close of this phase with the approval of our fraud project. Not much more to say on going concern. I gave a pretty robust update in January to you about how we addressed all the public interest issues. We believe that we've been responsive to them all, and we look forward to it being certified and then being out in the marketplace with implementation materials and support for that standard. And I think fraud goes very much with it. When we took those on, they were the two sort of burning issues at the time that were challenging confidence in the conduct of audit. So we've tackled those both now. So maybe we could reflect, and this slide I've been using some form of this slide over the last few months, but this is now almost 6 years into the job. I'd like to say that we as a board have changed, but the world is changing around us. Thinking about what we set out to do 6 years ago, which was putting all the public interest at the heart of our work, so tackling issues of paramount importance to enhance confidence in audits. Secondly, just being able to move with much greater agility and speed in the marketplace, and thirdly was doing so in such a way that engaged a much broader group of stakeholders in a much more intensive fashion and meet people where they want to have been met. I believe that we've been successful on those accounts. We are confident that our actions together, and this is really as a package, will materially improve the quality of audits and enhance the confidence of the standard setting process as well. And that is the reality. And you just think, I'll switch to this slide. If you look at the left-hand side of this page, these are all the standards we have approved. We've done some other work too, as well, but these are the major standards approved. This is a comprehensive list of standards that have been approved over the last few years. That comes after auditor reporting and 540 audited accounted estimates. This is a lot. And really, if you go back to where we are right now, we need to give the market time to absorb so that the package of standards has their intended outcome. And this is why we need to recognize it. We don't want to exhaust the marketplace, both practitioners and those who benefit from audits. And so really this is similar to, as Gabriella says, a realization that we need to provide some stability. And if you think about what that means, is we as a board have sort of committed to, and since we've cleared the decks in many ways, that there'll be no new major standards until 2027. And not only that, to get there, we need to give time for consultations, because it's the same people implementing that are commenting on our project, and they're not just commenting on ours, they're working with IAASB, they're working with the IAASB, the IAASB, IOSCO, and others. So we know that we need to give space, and we know that we need to give time. We've proven that we could move quickly when needed, and we will, if needed. But there's now a moment of time just to change the pace of standard setting, not stop our work. This offers us a real opportunity. We talked about it a second ago, is like, as we're thinking out future projects, we can have more time to set up a more robust coordination approach with IAASB. Both boards are seeing this. You see that we didn't come up with this by ourselves. We worked it together, thinking through the future. And then we could have more dialogue and interaction with practitioners. I know practitioners have had this concern that as the number of practitioners on our board decline, that they will lose voice and that we will become disconnected with current practice. We're not doing that. We're setting up many mechanisms to have engagement with the practitioner community out there, whether it's at the former firms level, the IFAC level, the council level, at our board, with TAs, practice fellows. We're creating a mechanism with the GPBC. We'll continue to meet with small and medium practitioners through their advisory group at IFAC. We will have events and other opportunities. It'll just be more multifaceted and sometimes more project specific. But we know that needs to continue. And then finally, where technology is definitely, from my perspective, our lead board topic going forward, we know that this has to be a consultative approach. It has to be based upon what is actually happening in the marketplace and how are regulators seeing what's happening in the marketplace. Because we want to facilitate the use of technology, and it's no good doing something that is not going to be enforceable or acceptable. And so one theme that we discussed last week when I was meeting with the Forum of Firms, but is something we discussed at the board with audit evidence and risk response, that three-way dialogues between practitioner communities, the regulatory community, and the standard setter have to be more common with us in the same room. We do a lot bilaterally, but now we have to think about new ways to maybe get people around the table. So when you have practice saying this and the regulators say this, and we try to find an approach and navigate between it, let's make sure that we're all on the same page, so we're not talking past each other. How is this going to affect our timelines? Again, remember, no major new standards to the end of 2027. The ones that are slight difference would be experts, which is really, we're trying to keep it a limited project for us to make sure that we have interoperability with IAASB's work. We are not touching 5,000 on in terms of experts. Like, we believe it's interoperable already, but the other standards we will make effectively conforming and consequential amendments. And so that will go out this year for exposure and hope to finish that up this year. Our focus on implementation support, you'll see the big technology projects, audit evidence and risk response. That's a big project. We know that. We're going to take time. I know the profession is concerned because this could have impacts on methodologies. The plan is to have an exposure draft approved in the second quarter of next year. So that is taking the time to do the work to make sure that we have understanding and alignment. It's complex technical issues. Risk response is a big project too. We have to deal with some of the internal control issues that we discussed with this group previously. And then 500 modernization, again, that project will actually begin next year. QM and technology, I'll say something that I said in other meetings, is that we're not determined what course of action we'll take. We are not reopening QM1. There is one paragraph in ISQM1, 32F, related to technological resources with 4 paragraphs of guidance associated with it. I believe technology development and acquisition will generally be managed at the firm level, and we may need some approach to help set up the guardrails for acceptance by the regulatory community. But we need to do the fact-finding now to see what actually is happening, how much variance is out there, how are regulators across jurisdictions interacting with the QM component of it, and do we need guidance, do we need standard setting from it? But we are not committed to a standard setting path on this. The information gathering just beginning right now will be led by that. It may end up in one, it may end up the other. We haven't used a practice note in over a decade, about a decade. That could come back in soon. You could, with some real due process as part of the project. And then the LCE update, there was a primary concern at our board when we passed it, particularly among some board members, that the gap between the ISAs and the LCE standard shouldn't grow too wide when you approve. So that's supposed to begin in earnest later this year or next. We may have to, with other priorities, be flexible on it. Now the question is like, how long do you want that gap to persist? We've updated the fraud and going concern standard. How quickly do those changes need to flow into the LCE standard? And there may be need for some flexibility there, but the board hasn't decided to change its approach to that. I don't know, Linda, before I get into fraud, should we pause here strategically and then go into fraud more specifically?
I think that's a good idea, and I think we probably want to talk a little bit more about technology. When we did our preparation session, we spoke about it quite a lot, but I almost think I want to ask you to maybe elaborate a little bit. We've seen your technology paper, the position, and talking about how auditors use technology in audits versus what the auditor needs to do about technology in the company that it audits. So we sort of have that, but we were just sort of discussing among ourselves when we prepared whether we fully understand the scope and the thinking around what it is that you want to do, because in a way it's almost how do you redesign or enhance how you write audit standards, considering this technological explosion that we're going through. So it's not just AI, but it's also all sorts of other things. So the thinking around that, the thinking around how do you write things that don't date very quickly? It can become extremely technical, and before you know it, that's sort of yesterday's thing. So maybe just, and it's potentially for the benefit of my education, and I won't say for the benefit of the education of my board members, but maybe just elaborate a little bit on the thinking, because I think, again, the scoping, the what to solve and why is really important, and it is a very important project.
So we think about it in a few ways, but the first thing is we have to keep to a principles-based approach. That is the most important thing, because if we're unprinciple-based, we'll be writing about specific instances of technology that could be outdated in the future. Our current viewpoint is that the audit model is not broken. It's about the elaboration of technology within the existing audit model. And where the challenges occur is when a piece of technology is doing different elements of the audit together. And how do you deal with it? I can't say that we've solved this issue, like the categorization of the approaches yet. Those type of discussions are really occurring in the audit evidence and risk response model. Like, how do you gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence, like the core of it? That's why we need to do that standard. And then how you handle your responses. And so that's why those standards are so important from a framework perspective to do it. Now, the quality management topic, to me, is important, not because it'll tell you how to apply, whether a specific instance of the use of technology is important, but it's about how you know that the technological resource has been developed and determined its adequate uses, appropriate uses, in a quality manner. And like, this is not dissimilar to what we see in the banking sector around model risk management, model governance, model validation. And it seems to me that should be done at a principle-based level, at the firm level. And that's really the only place we have as a branch off the quality management standards. Now, I'm not going to say that it's going to be ISQM3. That's why I say we're open. Like, there's guidance could be the place. Like, okay, how do you articulate the application of the principle with a specific use of technology, or how do you develop a framework for the development of technology? We're open. And so it's really, I can't give you a specific answer, but we're going to go through that process of the quality management. And then there's things about specific things that our standards are just outdated. Like, if you think about the 500 series, and I'll take the issue of confirmations, like, confirmations in the world of APIs, it seems outdated, and we're just going to modernize in very discrete chunks a few standards as it relates to the 500 series. So it's like, okay, let's deal with the fundamental framework standards in 330, 500, and 520, get that done right, which is a big project. That's not a small ask. Let's start thinking about the firm development of technological resources and what guidance you may have to do for standards or guidance. And let's be very targeted about technological approaches. I hope that answers it.
And I'm just going to open it up if you have questions, I think on technology specific, but also the stand back on the agenda, the work plan. There were a couple of things that we discussed, which I'll quickly mention, and I'm sure people will have further comments when it comes to the work plan. Obviously agreeing that you do need to make space for this quality management, QM element of technology. That is really important. That I think there's potentially, again, the collaboration and the link to maybe the more ethical side and the collaboration with IAASB on that. Do you want to comment maybe on the two things? The one is the materiality project, because that's going to be postponed a little bit, and how sensitive will that be to some of your stakeholders, because we know it's always a sensitive matter. And the other one is, and maybe it's early days, but just on PyTrack 2, but maybe that's something for the July meeting. And then anything else on the work plan that people have got comments on, I'll just take then as well. Thanks, Tom.
So I'll deal with PyTrack 2. I don't want to get out in front of the comment letter analysis. I'm aware of some change positions potentially from what we expected in the comment letters. We'll have to consider that and think about the right course of action going forward on that. So I think it would be too early. I don't want to preempt the due process here. It's given too much weight to specific letters over the other. The materiality question is, it's always a question of our resources and priorities. And we're already at full. We've agreed upon the environment that I laid out. The question is what would come off, or what added resources would we have? In my mind, technology must be the most important resource consumer in addition to all the implementation support that we have. And materiality just is not on this immediate cut. It is right there going forward in the future, but you have to make choices. Otherwise, we just commit to everything. And in fact, that's complicated. We've had a quick discussion with the IFER-SCWG about this last week. We will continue to, particularly regulatory community has raised this one. I do think the interlinkages between sustainability, materiality, and materiality in the reporting world, sustainability plus the financial reporting world needs to be considered, maybe given that some time to play out, makes a little sense as well.
Yeah, and I think IFER and the audit regulators are probably the ones that feel strongest about materiality. So I think that engagement feedback is really important. We certainly support that there's flexibility in the work plan. And yes, absolutely, technology is important. I like the thought that you said you're going to only get to an ED somewhere in I think the second half of next year, because this one will be really important. Like all projects, it's really important to spend the energy up front to make sure you scope it appropriately and deal with it appropriately and gather the necessary information. And I'm sure you also have a reference group or experts group or something on technology.
Yeah, we have a number of different groups we've established on the technology side. But again, going back to like audit evidence risk response, this is an area where we see that we'll have to have real dialogue that includes practitioners, regulators, and us at the table. And so we'll take the time on that. The one thing on audit evidence, remember, we're not starting from scratch there. We've taken this approach after an ED was issued with robust comment letters and interactions with stakeholders on it. So we're also benefiting from that. It is probably the most complex project that we've taken since the QM projects.
Yeah. It also has a technology, very important technology overlay. So definitely, and from the PIB support for that focus and the flexibility to potentially deal with 5,000 issues. We're clearly having a good round. People are happy, it looks to me. Tom, so do you want to talk about fraud on that happy note?
Well, yeah, it's nothing like getting a room more excited by discussions of fraud. Unless they were really looking forward to the completion of the project, when then you'd be very happy. So we will be shortly submitting our fraud standard for certification. This has been a project we've been working closely with you on for some time. We did, for fraud and going concern, spend a lot of time up front defining what issues we wanted to address, which I think probably lended ourselves to have a high degree of support from each other in terms of the public interest issues matched our project proposal pretty well, and therefore I feel confident that we've adjusted, just I think some quick statistics. We've spent a lot of time dealing with the exposure draft, that 14, 15 board discussions, 89 written comments, and the engagement in terms of outreach, like with most things, hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands, engaged with it over time. So it benefited. So like we have been doing with you since in recent times, we decided to articulate how we addressed your public interest issues on this. And really, the most important thing is the recalibration of the importance of addressing risk and material misstatement due to fraud to bring it on what probably is on par with what we think about error. And some of it is strengthening the actual requirements, and some of it was strengthening the mindset. One of my pet peeves when I read 240 originally, it talks about what an auditor can't be expected to do. And we've changed that. We've decoupled the inherent limitations with the auditor's responsibility, articulated the auditor's responsibility. We're not changing the fundamental role of the auditor, but we're making it pretty clear they're responsible for related fraud. Now, this standard benefits from our risk assessment standard. We don't want to change 315, but in many ways, it's about putting a lens, the fraud lens on 315 and making the risk assessment process much more robust. And then how you respond to assess fraud risks and identify instances of fraud and suspected fraud. And then professional skepticism plays a key part, and we highlight that throughout the standard. We use 710 and key audit matters as the filtering mechanism in the report. And remember, communication here doesn't start with the auditor's report. It starts throughout the process, constant communication with management and those charged with governance on it. And we highlighted that. And that's been a pretty consistent theme of us using the auditor's report and also two-way communication throughout our standards over time. In terms of the auditor's role, respect to authenticity of the documentation, this obviously was a big issue for you. It's a big issue for us too. The question is how much could we do in the scope of this project while getting the project done? So as you see, we strengthened the conditional requirement as it relates to the authenticity of documentation. Be really clear if conditions are identified, what the auditor shall do to investigate, enhanced application material. Regarding the important view, it really relates to the paragraph in ISO 200. We're open to revisions, but that wasn't a small ask. That would have had pervasive impacts well beyond the fraud standard and would have thrown us into re-exposure. So it's on our list, and we're using the audit evidence and risk response project to address this issue because it does have implications for audit evidence and the risk response. So that is how we've dealt with it. I think it will heighten the auditor's professional skepticism of the process. We then obviously started to think about the interactions. Everything is taken together, so we've added requirements and foundational standards to 315 and 330. We enhanced the requirement in 600 because it's group audit implications. And obviously this, with the effective dates happening at the same time as going concern and potentially PI, we were very sure to interact. So we make sure that any changes in the auditor's report make sense and are coherent. Like, I think we've dealt with it in many ways by having a separate section on going concern, and this is really in CAMS and highlighted as part of CAMS. Again, this is lots of coordination with IAASB on this project. This is an example of a type of project that there's not huge overlap, but there are maybe unintended consequences of us acting without coordination. So we've been coordinating with IAASB throughout the whole project. And before we signed off on any draft that went to the board, we made sure there was a final sanity check with the IAASB team. No standard setting project is complete without a few last minute items that came up. These were the two last minute items that came up. It almost came up, management override of controls came up on almost two fronts. One, that we were imposing things with unintended consequences that would make the standard too onerous, and then there was a concern that we would reduce the workload that was being managed. I don't think anything is that either are the case where we landed. We reaffirmed that the risks of material misstatement due to fraud assessed at the financial statement level are significant risks. We also clarified that those risks of management override of control exist at the financial statement level, but may also be determined to be at the assertion level. So that required a bit of clarification. We don't think it reduces the work effort at all. It actually may increase the work effort of the auditor. happy to talk about that a little bit more if you want to. The final thing was stand back. And this was, maybe this is a lesson to us and the team about how you ask the question is really important. We asked the question whether are you okay with how we articulated a stand back wasn't needed? And so a number of, including the mounting group members, were fine with that. However, FER pointed out that this is a standard of such utmost importance that a stand back would be required. Now, let me talk to you a little bit to understand this issue a little bit, why it became a last minute issue. Really goes to the fact is the board's been grappling with where stand backs are really important, or are we just going to add a stand back to every requirement in our standards, which could be unhelpful and confuse the situation. Excuse me. And so we had no real framework for assessing it. We just had been adding it for some time. And there had been a view of this board that 315 and 330, in fact, had an implicit stand back anyway required for this fraud standard. This was a position that many of us were comfortable with at the time. But we also had tasked the 500, the audit evidence risk response team, to actually look philosophically at when the stand back could be useful. And it turns out on a major standard like fraud, we categorize like this is something that could be sensible in these particular moments. So Philippe would listen to that discussion in detail. So we got comfortable with one, that we had a framework that said that we should consider a stand back in this instance. And two, maybe this is, I was the key proponent of it, and this is maybe where standard setters should take the lesson, is why leave something implicit when it could be explicit? Like, people always could accuse standard setters of being a little obtuse. Let's be explicit. Like, we need it, so why not? And we found a way by drawing on 330 to have a very sharp requirement related to stand back. So I think we solved a lot of the issues by thinking holistically and bringing it back to the standard. I met with FER, the SCWG last week. They were very pleased that that's where we landed. They said it would have been a different type of meeting if we didn't land that way. But we just thought it was the right thing to do. If we already thought it was implicit, let's make it explicit. Now it coincides with the framework we're likely to have going forward. So that gives you a sense of where we ended up and how we responded to the public interest issues related to fraud. We are very excited about this standard. We think it's a significant step up. It doesn't change the fundamental role of the auditor, but it really clarifies the roles, the responsibilities, and the action that an auditor must take in the process, and enhances the communications associated with it. That seems like the right way to deal with the expectations gap. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that or any other piece of work we have ongoing.
Thank you very much for that. And it is the last opportunity that we have to speak to Tom about fraud before we need to consider it at our next meeting. So, Tom, thank you. Maybe just a few comments from my side. You know that we felt very strongly about fraud for a very long time. And it not that the auditor needs to get additional responsibility. It's not a forensic audit. But the concept of making sure that auditors understand that their work effort to find error that runs the risk of causing material misstatement and finding fraud should be at a much more equal level. So there's been significant progress in that, and we're very comfortable with that. The other big issue that we had was on transparency. And we believe that the close call transparency requirements are really, really important. And it certainly will hopefully go a long way to breach the expectation gap. Is what is that, what that orange flag, that amber flag. So really, really important to us, and we're comfortable with the progress made and with what was achieved. Thank you. You've included our public interest issues. I'm sort of pointing to Rathio and Pavel and Naraya, because I really like your little icons that sort of explain in a little picture what each one of our public interest issues mean. Maybe we can make ours a little bit more interesting. I can see Rathio's eyes lit up because it almost in a little picture explains what the public interest issue is about. And we will obviously still go through our whole process and our documentation that the staff prepare for us, but very important. Then just on these last two aspects, and I'll let Philippe come in because he was also, as you know, he was the observer, but we spoke about them. It always makes us a little bit nervous when these last minute things come up. In a way, it's probably often inevitable, but it's important that it runs the risk of ending in the wrong place, especially if it was not very well fleshed out in the papers for members and our observer to prepare for it. But we were comfortable that it ended in the right place when it comes to the management override, because at least there's almost like a strengthening now of making sure that it gets the appropriate risk assessment and risk determination. And then obviously also on the stand-back position. We were a little bit nervous, as I said, when it happened, and because it calls for a debate that we didn't really even consider when we did our preparation and our briefing for the session. But similarly, you rather want that to happen and for it to be dealt with, and we agreed as a board when we prepared that we're comfortable with where it ended. So I'm going to first go to Philippe, if there's anything, Philippe, that you want to mention from the meeting, and then I'll go to the cards that are up.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Tom, for the presentation. I fully support what Tom has presented in terms of, quality of discussion about the two last-minute issues, and the way it has been sorted out and where it has landed finally. I think that, for the fraud project specifically, it's true that the stand-back requirement raises an issue, a sort of general issue about, I would say, the links between professional skepticism and the necessity of a stand-back requirement. Professional skepticism being a sort of permanent attitude, stand-back requirement being something spot in a precise situation. And what is at stake probably is the risk of proliferation of stand-back everywhere, which would deteriorate the quality of this, procedure per se, and probably it would deserve, as you say, Tom, some philosophical approach and some project to clarify, these links between the general attitude of skepticism and the necessity and documentation, because I think it's a key issue, the documentation of stand-back requirement implementation. But this being said, I think it was really okay, and the significant risk, we were expecting something like that, and finally it has happened. So on the side of the public interest issues, I think everything is okay, as Tom has presented it.
Thank you, Philippe. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for your presentation. I just on the fraud topic, I just wanted to look at this the management override of controls, because it seemed to me that it was quite a technical discussion that was had about this, with significant risks, predetermined risks, etc., etc. I think really my question to you is, if you were trying to summarize the outcome of the debate around management override to, say, a preparer or to an investor, how would you sort of simply summarise what has changed in the standard in this area, and how you feel that has enhanced the standard?
Thanks, Mark. Tom, I'm going to take the other two questions as well, and then back to you.
Thank you,
Tom.
Chair. Thank you very much, Tom, for the. I'm very satisfied with the final landing of this fraud project. I think that's the core message is not only to the regulator or the auditor, but the investor side as well. And it's not only for fraud, but also for the going concern issue as well. And yesterday, we did have a very good discussion with the ICGN, and then Sandy is coming from the investor community. And they have the two messages to the standard setting system. The one is that don't not only count the comment letter. The number of comment letter doesn't mean very much thing that we have to weighing the importance of the comment when we evaluate the comment, not only the number of but also have to pay attention to the content, especially from the comments coming from the investor side. Should be need some sort of the proper attention. That one message. The second message is that it's very difficult for them to, how can I say, to understand the last minute, how can I say, the technical difficulties. What is the importance of management override control? What is the importance of sandbag requirement? So their message is that the more direct connection or contact between the standard setter and the investor community is critical. You first said that you would like to have more trilateral communication, not only with the regulator side and auditor side and the standard board, standard setters. Perhaps the direct communication with the investor community might be a little bit, perhaps it's one of the role of the PIOB as well, but I think that's the direct communication with the investor, between investor and SSB, might be helpful. What is your observation of their, perhaps at the hindsight, what is your reaction from the investor community or the communication with the investor community, and is there anything that we can do more or strengthen the relationship with the investor community?
Yeah, there certainly is an important one for investors. Janine?
Thank you. Yes, I have one comment, actually, that's on the management override. I was a little bit surprised to see that at the last meeting in which the approval of the fraud standard was scheduled, such a big technical issue popped up in terms of process, and that's more generally, I think, when it's the last meeting where a standard is up for approval. I would expect that all the most important technical issues would have already been dealt with. I also think that's in a due process perspective much better if that would have all have been dealt with, and only the last final small things are being looked at during the last meeting, like, okay, are there any other things? So a sort of real fatal flaw thing should be happening, I think, that is in the public interest at the previous meeting. But that's more my thinking. I just want to share that, and it's more general comment. On the stand back, that's very interesting, I think. Also, that you explained also how that should be applied in the whole ISA structure, whether you don't want to end up having it in each and every standard, but which standards should it be put in? My question around that is, what is actually the expectation you have on how it should work in practice? Is it the partner signing off the audit opinion that has to do a stand back? Is it the whole team? It could be a sort of check the box compliance outcome thing, a stand back, like in the file before some manager filling it out, checking the box, yes, we've done it. Or if it would be linked to something real, like you have also the fraud discussion in a pre-audit meeting, if you would require something real, then it can really change the behavior and really drive professional skepticism if the team has to come together to discuss, have we enough to say, yes, we have, there are no material misstatements due to fraud. So that is my comment. And the last one on the transparency, and that is for both the going concern and the fraud standard. We have this public interest issue for both projects on transparency, so through the auditor report. And there's two different ways how it's been solved in both standards. So the going concern has this conclusion in each audit report on the views of the auditor on the going concern. And if there's this close call, there is this linkage with CAM, cross-referencing it. So in this separate section in the auditor report. In the fraud standard, there is reference to ISO 701 on the key audit matters, where there will be in the key audit matters a separate section on fraud that should be then also with a header that says fraud, is what I read in the standard. But here you see two different ways of transparency, and also given the meeting we had yesterday with the investor community, they really want to understand through the auditor report, it's the only product they see from the auditor, and they can read what the auditor has done, and in particular in these two important areas. That's very informative for them. So now it's with the PI definition being also not yet clear what comes out of that project, PI track 2 then I should say, that has a direct link on the transparency level in the auditor report in relation to fraud, because it could only be for PIs, and depending on, it is for PIs only, let me put it like that, but then it depends on where the definition will end, to what extent this will be in practice.
Okay,
So-
and then the last one quickly to Tsecho, and then back to you, Tom, to respond, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the first one Janine has already covered, which was around the stand-back position and how that is envisaged to play out in practice. The second question that I wanted to just check, it perhaps touches on the work plan and what we envisage for the next 3 years. But more importantly, it's a question that is probably linked with the conversation we had yesterday again with the investor community around digital assets. I've looked through what the plan is when it comes to that as part of the bigger long-term aspect and the non-authoritative guidance on that. But I guess the question becomes, if this becomes a much more urgent need in the markets that we are operating in, is it something that we can perhaps then bring forward and act with speed on it in terms of the guidance around the measurements and establishment of store of value in the financial statements? I know we've got guidance currently, but if it becomes something that we then need to prioritize as a project in the short term, if there is need to do that. Thank you.
Back to you, Tom.
So thank you for that. So Mark, quite simply, I think, let me actually deal with the management override more generally. It turns out that part of the challenge was there was a misfooter in our standards, which referred people to the wrong paragraph. We were trying to fix this, and this is one of the reasons that we continue to engage with different groups throughout the development of the project, and everything is interconnected. So when you're dealing with 315 and using that and connecting to us, like one change could have an impact at 315, 260 requirements. We effectively broke a link when we were trying to enhance the standard. because we were engaging with the general public, effectively what we did was we went back to where we were to clarify it and fix the linkages. Nothing really was changed. The process wasn't broken whatsoever. We're always adapting as we're going over time, and I think we landed in a good space. That's what standard setters do. There's all sorts of examples of us changing the standard up to the final minute. We're very judicious about how often we did it. And so, you know, it was really an unintended consequence, but we knew that there was an issue weeks before the final board meeting. We had solutions already for the board. I think this is exactly how standard setters should work. Like, we hope not to have a broken link between two standards very often. Mark, quickly, in terms of conscious of time, the importance of what we're doing is not allowing auditors to dismiss instances where there have been management override to a very marginal issue. And I think by raising it to the financial statement level, which is always a different risk, it will always require serious work and attention at the auditor and involve much more communication. I think that's what's the most robust thing that we've done here. Tom, your point about don't count in the comment letters, that's a mantra we have. We don't even tabulate comment letters really in charts anymore. I hated it when we try to break it out in themes. We do highlight, separate the role of regulators and investors, so that is brought out a little bit more, but we will never just comment on comment letters by numbers. And when it does come in, I sometimes jump in to remind the board that that's not the case. In terms of investor community, the fraud and going concern standards were two standards where we had quite a bit of contact with the investor community up front and helping to scope it, and really particularly as it relates to work effort and changing the auditor mindset and the communication element. So yes, we will continue to interact. ICGN is one of our key stakeholders, but it's not limited to that. And trying to meet investors in ways that they care. We talked about on audit evidence and risk response, like how to meaningfully engage them, but not in the technical details. They're not going to care what's happening in paragraph 32A. So we talked about management overall. So in terms of the practicalities of the stand back, we discussed this at the board ourselves. First of all, I think all of our standards puts ultimate accountability on the engagement partner. So that's where the accountability, obviously all of the requirements of 220 apply if it's a requirement to, in terms of assured audit quality at the engagement level. But we point to the objectives of the standard. This is why we need to have very clear objectives of the standard up front. A stand back is, okay, we've done all of our work. We have to assess whether there's sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Have we fulfilled the objectives of the standard in the conduct of our work? That's really where we need to point people to. Janine, I actually don't agree with your interpretation on taking two different approaches on transparency. We were quite intentional here. The reason we didn't use CAMs for going concern is that going concern issues are pervasive on related to financial statements, and we could disaggregate them from other CAMs. The issue we had with fraud was that in many instances you couldn't disaggregate risk due to fraud or error. Sometimes they're a little bit of both. And what we wanted to do was make sure that the auditor's report was as streamlined as possible. So we were told, investors said that they wanted all the information about going concern in one space and then cross-referenced as appropriately, whereas in relation to fraud, the only filtering mechanism we had that was simple was 701 and CAMS. And that really was the outlook, and I felt like we could do it. As it relates to Pi, I don't know where we're gonna land, because we haven't done the analysis. But all that will change is the scope of companies that scope of audits where the auditor report would change. So right now, it's just for listed entities. If we switched it to publicly traded entities, it would be for publicly traded entities. If we extend further, it will be for PIs. So it's just extended the requirement for the types of audits, so it just will be more. Finally, digital assets, we're open to anything. This is why we keep a little bit of slack at our work program. Remember, we put 5,000 on our work program pretty quickly, and we'll adapt. But right now, digital assets, compared to everything else we're doing, including when we have demands for materiality and other things, doesn't rise that way, but we will still remain open to it.
Thank you, Tom. Is it a new comment, Philippe? Okay, and thereafter I'll give you any final concluding remarks, Tom.
Yeah, just a brief comment, because before I spoke about the fraud project that Tom had presented, but I'd like to come back with some concerns and encouragement too on the technology project, because, you know, I'm convinced that you enter, if I may use a metaphor, you enter the dragon's cave singing a little song. What do I mean? Some meetings ago, Tom, I remember one of your statements saying, we cannot now speak about technology and use words in the standard like 50 years ago, I would say, which is absolutely true. But it's more than that, the question of technology, and you know that. It's about a transformation. I think that the technology is going to induce transformation process in the way audits are performed. And the audit firms at the moment are working on that. It's in their strategy. And my concern that I want to share with you is the fact that I don't know if the project, due to the speed of change in exponential in the technology area and so on, is feasible at the moment this way without, you know, having a clear vision of what the transformation of the profession could be in the near future based on these technological tools. It's just in terms of organization of project, some feeling that I wanted to share with you.
Well, it's something I've thought long and hard about. Of course, anticipating business model change as a standard setter is something we have in the back of our mind, but we can drive the business model change too. So there's a little bit of continuing. This is why monitoring and speaking to those who are actually implementing the technology and those who are regulating the technology is really important throughout. We may have to alter our approach. I think we have enough flexibility to do it. But I'm not sure as a standard setter, we should be articulating the vision of digitally enabled audit and how it's transforming. So like, that's the balance. So Philippe, I'm not dismissing your point. I'm fully aware of it. We need to keep it in the back of our mind. And what we're trying to do is be set up to enable enough principles and guidance that our system can flex, but in a way that could still engenders public trust and can be regulated.
Thank you, Tom. Any closing remarks from you before we go to the certification of going concern?
No, I think this has been a really helpful discussion. Philippe, the remark is a really helpful reminder to me, and a number of the suggestions, you know, we keep, everything is kept in mind as we go forward, and I think we're at an exciting time thinking forward on technology.
Thank you very much, and thank you. This was a really useful session. Thank you to both of you, both of the chairs and James, and for the session and all the preparation that went into it as well.